The air in our bedroom felt thick as velvet. Every breath a small, measured event that made my chest press against the night. His hand rested on the edge of the blanket like a promise held lightly, his presence a quiet pressure at the back of my neck. I could hear the soft scrape of fabric, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room, the cadence of his breath blending with mine into a rhythm that made my pulse tilt. I lifted my hand slowly, the movement deliberate, and when my fingertips brushed the inside of his wrist, it was as if an old map folded itself open. He held my gaze without speaking, and in that silence, something shifted between us. Before I go on, if these kinds of confessions pull at you, click like and subscribe. It takes 1 second and it helps me keep telling stories like this. Did you ever have a moment so small it felt like a turning point? We had been married for 7 years. He had a look that had always read me like a book with corners folded. That night, he used his eyes instead of words. I said his name, and his voice landed warm and low. He whispered, "I need to ask you something." And the way he said ask made it heavier than a casual question. I smiled because that is what I do when I am unsure. He reached for my cheek, his thumb tracing a line that felt like a compass. I let him because I trusted him, because trust had been the foundation under every soft and rough patch we had survived. He inhaled, and the scent of his shampoo filled the space between us like a memory. Then he said the thing. The sentence unfolded slowly, deliberate as a tide. It would be the kind of request none of my friends would expect me to accept. It would ask of me a shape of surrender that felt both scary and electrical. I remember thinking that the word desire can sound like a fault line or a lifeline. I tell you this not to shock, but to share the tremor I felt when he first voiced it. He said he wanted me to invite someone into our night, to watch and maybe to join. He said it with the kind of gentleness that makes temptation seem like a shared secret instead of a betrayal. I felt my breath catch and my face go warm. I felt the old habit of saying no rise first, reflexive and loud, trained by fear and by the way I had been taught to protect what was mine. He spoke again, softer, answering the no before it left my mouth. "Will you trust me?" he asked. "Will you let me see you in a way I have wanted to see for a long time?" he said. His words were small and huge at once. I asked, "Why now?" And he told me I had always been my own border, beautiful and closed in equal measure. I listened, and I felt a tide of hesitation wash through me. We spoke then in shards and sentences that kept meeting. He said, "I love you." I said, "I know." He said, "This is about us, about honesty." I replied that my hands trembled. He asked if my heart was ready. I answered that I did not know. He said we could stop any time. I asked if he would leave if I said no. He assured me he would not. He said he would be there, as witness and as partner. I said I needed time to think, and he touched my lips with his thumb and promised to wait. The dialogue looped and widened until it felt like a ritual. Each exchange left scent marks, a blend of cologne and the citrus of the soap we used on Sunday mornings. Each sentence moved us closer to a place that had no map. Building the intimacy was not only about words. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the faint undertone of his aftershave. The bedspread had the faint scratch of cotton against skin. My skin remembered vacations and arguments and late-night jokes. His hand found the hollow of my back, and the pressure there was a punctuation mark. Sound became a character in the room. The clock ticked with a soft, insistent presence. My throat made small sounds that I tried to hide. He leaned in to kiss my forehead, then my temple, then my ear, and each contact carried a tiny electric charge. We moved into a longer conversation that sounded like a dance. I asked what he imagined. He described shapes and light, a mirror and a quiet observer. I asked if it was about proving something. He said no. I said I was afraid of breaking something we could not repair. He said that consent is a promise that can be negotiated. We circled the topic until we had both said enough to keep the flame alive without letting it become wildfire. Then he offered names and boundaries. He suggested we think of people who knew us in some way and would respect our rules. He named people in a practical voice, and I felt the world tilt because those were names I knew. Sarah, from book club, who always wore red lipstick, offered to be the one to meet them first. Daniel, from our running group, could be the one to check logistics. Mia, from work, might arrange music and light. Javier could be a neutral presence to greet. Ellen, who used to babysit the kids, lives 2 streets over, and Tom, who runs the local bar, were mentioned as possible decoys. I felt my stomach flip because their names carried normal lives and Sunday barbecues and office small talk. He said he would never use someone who would not understand consent. He mentioned Priya, the therapist we once saw for couples counseling, as someone to consult on boundaries. Naming these people made it suddenly feasible and terrifying. It made the idea less like a mad impulse and more like a plan that had to be handled with care. My background is part of why this particular request hit hard. I grew up in a small town where feelings were folded into practical chores. My mother taught me to speak softly and to keep my desires tidy behind curtains. As a teenager, I learned to bargain with silence to keep peace at home. In college, I studied literature and learned the language of longing in novels and essays, and I found a private vocabulary that did not always match the one at our family table. My decisions to move cities, to study, to say yes to a job that offered independence were ways of testing boundaries. I married because we wanted stability and someone who read the same books and could argue about coffee. Yet there has always been a private corridor inside me where curiosity lived. That corridor had gathered dust but never closed. When my husband suggested we push a wall of that corridor aside, I had to reconcile the neat life I had built with a possibility that felt messy and alive. The present married life with his soft touch and our agreements felt safe, and yet a part of me wanted to open the window to see what sound came in. I did not want to lose him or the family we had. I wanted to discover if freedom and fidelity could live in the same breath. The moment of suggestion created an immediate conflict. I was pulled between fear and a sudden hunger for something I had not named aloud. I thought of every cautionary story I had been told and every quiet wish I had buried. My mind replayed a memory from college when a curtain had been pulled aside at a party and everything had felt sudden and wrong because it happened without consent. I shuddered at the memory, and then I remembered a different night when I had allowed myself to dance in full view of someone I liked, and it had felt like learning to walk again. The conflict sat in my chest like a stone, and yet also a seed. I asked myself what I would regret more, losing the chance to explore or losing the foundations of the life we had built. My hands clenched around the fabric of the sheet, and I breathed into the question. I felt tears that were not sad, but uncertain, and he held my knees and said we could set every rule we wanted. That was the deciding hinge. I felt myself tilt toward yes with a quiet, careful intention to protect what mattered most. We planned slowly, as if mapping a fragile bridge. We agreed on a code word, on who would be present in the room, but not intrusive, on how to stop everything at once, on how to check in after. He wrote notes, and we laughed at the awkwardness of it. We talked about lighting and music and the scent of candles. We imagined the third person arriving late, shoes in hand, nerves folded into polite conversation. We discussed where to place a small lamp so faces were softened. We debated whether to leave the bedroom door cracked for safety. In this planning stage, I mentioned my friends by name again as possible witnesses and part of the contingency plan. Sarah agreed to sit in the living room with a text ready to call if needed. Daniel offered to pick up groceries so the evening would seem ordinary if anyone noticed. Mia promised to handle the playlist. Javier said he would make sure there was a car outside. Ellen volunteered to keep her phone on in case of emergency. Tom offered a diversion if the night needed to end abruptly. Priya advised a post-conversation ritual to recalibrate. Hearing them around our choice made it feel communal and not reckless. The night arrived with a hush. The third person came in polite shoes, a reserved way of smiling, a gentle nod that acknowledged the paper we had agreed upon and the safety it promised. They introduced themselves as Alex, and their voice was even, their hands steady. The room smelled like citrus and vanilla, and the lamp we had chosen made shapes on the wall that looked like water. At first, the exchanges were mundane and careful. I remember Alex saying, "I am honored to be trusted," and I answered, "Thank you," with a voice that shook. He asked if I wanted to sit, and I said yes. I felt the fabric of the couch against my skin, the slight hum of the heater at my feet. There were 5 sensory edges to that first meeting that I can still recall. The taste of the wine a little sweet and close on the tongue, the sight of shadows from the lamp moving soft on the ceiling, the sound of our 4 breaths sinking for a few seconds, the texture of the couch cushion pressing into my thigh, the scent of lavender from the candle we had set on the dresser. Those small things kept me anchored while the larger emotional currents moved. Dialogue in that room became a careful weaving of consent and curiosity. He asked, "Are you comfortable?" And I answered, "Yes," then "no," then "yes" again, as truth shifted. He said, "Tell me a boundary," and I listed 3, which Alex repeated to show understanding. He asked if I wanted to set a timer for check-ins, and my husband said, "Let's check at 15-minute marks," and agreed. Alex asked, "Would you like me to be quiet?" And I said, "Only if you can listen and be respectful." He asked, "Do you want physical presence only or conversation as well?" Replied, "I want both in measured parts." He said, "I will follow your lead," and that promise sounded like a chain that kept me free at the same time. My husband watched with a softness that felt like both guard and complicit lover. His breath was a metronome against my shoulder. I watched the look in his eyes when Alex reached out to touch the back of my hand, the way it tested without pressing. The room held its breath along with us. There were moments of tension that felt like storms compressed into minutes. In one such moment, a memory of childhood caution rose unbidden, and I felt my body betray my curiosity with a retreat. I clutched at the edge of the cushion and almost said, "Stop." I remembered the voice of my mother saying, "Keep your heart hidden," and the solidity of that lesson made me want to pull away. My husband noticed the pull and said softly, "Are you okay?" And I looked at him and saw his question was a harbor. The third person paused and said, "Only when you are ready." And that simple patience removed the last edge of fear. In another moment, a humorless image of public shaming flashed in my mind, and I felt shame begin to crawl into my throat. I swallowed and spoke out the word "safe," and naming it made it smaller. The tension resolved not because the scene dissolved, but because we named the fear and gave it rules. The third tension came later, when desire and guilt braided together, when the warmth in my chest said, "Keep going," and my conscience whispered caution. I closed my eyes and listened to both, and then I chose to breathe and stay present to the sensation of touch and the sound of my partner's voices, guiding and witnessing me. The exploration was less about acts and more about revelation. Each touch was a question, each look an answer. The room was a theater with low light and high attention. We moved through pauses that felt like breaths in a song. My husband guided with a tenderness that made me feel both seen and sheltered. The third person mirrored that care with a distant, respectful curiosity. We exchanged words that were intimate and sometimes funny as we recalibrated boundaries in real time. He said, "You look luminous," and I laughed nervously and said, "Do I?" And he said, "Yes." Alex said, "Your skin glows in this light," and I felt a heat that was not only physical, but also a flush of being witnessed. The soundscape shifted when music rose and fell, when a whisper became louder than a sentence, when a sigh carried more meaning than a paragraph. We found a cadence that felt consensual and creative, and by the time the night ended, I felt that something inside me had unlatched and rearranged itself. When it was over, my husband pressed his forehead to mine, and we breathed. His hands circled my waist like he was anchoring both of us back to shore. We sat in a silence that held no accusation, only a steady, careful gratitude. I felt the quiet after a storm, where everything is washed and strange and clearer than before. We checked in with each other with small questions. "Did you feel respected?" I asked. He said, "Always." "Did you feel safe?" he asked, and I said, "Yes." I felt an aftershiver of vulnerability that needed tending, and we tended it with shared jokes and gentle talk. We thanked Alex for their patience and presence, and they left with a small wave and a promise of discretion. That night, we lay awake and talked about what we learned and what needed changing. We made lists of things to keep and things to discard. It was practical and intimate and a little miraculous. 1 month later, we had conversations that felt like peeling an onion at a pace we could manage. We revisited agreements and laughed about the small stumbles. We were more honest about our limits and more adept at verbalizing needs. 3 months later, the novelty had softened into a new normal where we could speak openly about curiosity without fear. We invited Sarah and Priya to a dinner where conversation about boundaries became part of being community, and it strengthened us. 6 months passed, and trust had deepened in ways I did not expect. The ritual we created to reconnect after such nights turned into a regular practice of checking in about our emotional weather. Our marriage did not become perfect, but it became a container where complexity could live without shame. If this story touched something in you, write one word in the comments that describes how you feel about secrets and desires. Your word matters and helps others know they are not alone. If you enjoyed this narrative, subscribe to follow the next chapter of decisions and discoveries. Some doors open and do not close the same way again.